حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبو القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. السلام عليكم جميعا. I'm thinking about, mashallah, the weather is very good today, so. But thinking about how a lot of times during the life of any of the Imams, we can say probably, maybe with the exception of during the time of Imam Sadiq and Imam Baqir alayhim as-salam, and perhaps finally during the time of the 12th Imam, there were always a few people. There were always a handful of people. There were a handful of people when, Imam Hussein went to Karbala. There were a handful of people when Imam Hassan alayhi salam. There were always a handful of people, but that didn't take away from what they were able to accomplish. So inshallah, with our handful of people that we have here, that won't take anything away from what we're able to benefit from the teachings of the Ahl al-Bayt, inshallah. During the time of Imam Rida alayhi salam, and during the time of probably almost every single Imam, there were some difficulties, social, political difficulties. It's not that the Imams, even though they were the rightful leaders of humanity, the best person to be in charge of the government, the best person spiritually, the best person from every aspect, it didn't mean that they were given those rights. Right? We know the story of the Imams. We've seen all of their lives and we can testify to that. However, with the presence of those difficulties, with the presence of those few numbers, with the presence of all that they had to go through, we want to look at still what they were able to accomplish. So it's tremendous. We have a climate at the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen where after the death of the Prophet and onwards, even after the death of Amir al-Mu'mineen, it was a custom to curse the Ahl al-Bayt. Right? People from the minbar cursing the Ahl al-Bayt. Sounds crazy. It is. But it was happening. Now, you fast forward all the way to the time of Imam Rida alayhi salam, and you see how some of this political and social climate changed. The Ahl al-Bayt, despite this difficulty, despite this oppression, they were still loved amongst so much of the people. Right? When it talks about the hadith about live amongst people, so that when after you leave this world, that you're missed or that you're loved, they were the exact example of that. They crave your presence. They were the exact example of that. Imam Rida would go places, the famous hadith of the golden chain, the Habiyah, where he mentions that he's one of the conditions. All of the people who gathered around to listen to this hadith, everywhere that the Imam would go, would sit, people would be drawn to him. This wasn't just Imam Rida, but all of them. I mean, Imam Rida was being called the Sultan of Arab wal Ajam. Right? He was the king of those who are Arab and those who are non-Arab. That everyone, basically, on his journey, everyone from everywhere, they were drawn to him. They were drawn to his pure nature, to his leadership, to his piety, to his taqwa. So within all these difficulties, they still found a way to rise. And so there's a time when they're cursing the Ahl al-Bayt, and then we look at the time where Ma'mun, and he looks and he sees, he says, it's not at all to my benefit. It's not to my benefit if I curse the Ahl al-Bayt. It's going to make me look bad. Maybe there was a time when some of them were ignorant enough to accept this, but this is going to be difficult after all of these years with the presence of Imam Rida for me to continue this custom. It's going to make me look bad. So we see Ma'mun taking efforts and doing things to try to make himself seem in the eyes of the people close to Imam Rida. Oh, don't marry into our family. Imam Jawad, marry into our family. He goes and he's at the funeral of Imam Rida alayhi salam. Ma'mun is looking sad. Ma'mun is responsible for the martyrdom of the Imam, but he's looking sad at the funeral. The people don't know what's going on. He says, this is the Ahl al-Bayt. We give them our women. We love the Ahl al-Bayt. Because at this point, it's an undeniable value. It's an undeniable truth who the Ahl al-Bayt are. So it's like we have this saying in English, if you can't beat them, join them. So we can't do anything against him, or rather we can't get rid of him, or we'll try to. Well, eventually they did have to martyr them, but not by tainting ourselves. So we want to seem close. We want to seem that we are friends with the Ahl al-Bayt. And we see this strategy sometimes throughout by different caliphs that would try to invite the Imam, sit with us, be with us, so people can see or think that we're friends or that we are in good company with you. How the climate changed. One time they're cursing from the minbar. The next time they want everyone, please believe that I'm a friend of the Imam. Please believe that I know him and that we have a good relationship. So there's a drastic change. And this, obviously, it continued throughout the rest of the Imams. Imam Rida said, of course, that مَا مِنَّا إِلَّا مَسْمُوم أو مَقْتُولٌ, that from amongst the Ahl al-Bayt, that there are none of us who are not masmoom, who are not poisoned or martyred or killed. So all of the Ahl al-Bayt, they know that this is a tragedy that they all will face. We face some difficulties. If we want to compare probably people, mu'mineen living today in the West, are probably very similar in a lot of ways to the time and the era of the Prophet, in the sense that they are surrounded by non-Muslims, or surrounded by, in some cases, people who are not following the same path or don't share the same values, or their government is not sharing the same values or the same path. So we share some of these similarities as during the time of the early era of Islam, especially during the time of the Prophet, when Islam was new, when Islam was still being presented to people, when people were just coming to Islam. We live in a similar time in a lot of these ways. So I want to draw some things from this similarity. The point or the topic that I'm focused on tonight is the leadership that the Imams showed, and not just necessarily their leadership in terms of imamat, not necessarily their divine leadership, but I'm talking about their leadership just in their normal aspects of life. And what we want to take from this is, how does that compare to our situation, which in some ways is similar, and the roles of leadership that we have to play in a society which, maybe not share all of the same values as what we share. When we say leadership, when we say someone is a leader, like they have leadership camps and, leadership training. Leadership is a field of study in some universities. You can study leadership alone as a major, like in the University of Delaware. When leadership itself is recognized as such an important quality, in order to get to that point where someone is a leader or considered a leader, they need to have certain things, right? There's certain prerequisites, certain requirements in order for a person to reach that point. It's like similar to revolution. Revolution, it's a change in the way that things are flowing. It's a complete turn or change of things. A leader is someone who's able to send a direction to things. Now, sometimes that means that things may be going in one direction and you have to go in the complete opposite direction. Society may be this way, mainstream may be this way, but you have to go in the complete opposite direction. So that's when the qualities of leadership are really seen. It's easy to lead when everyone is following you and you're going all in the same direction. But sometimes leadership is not about that. Sometimes leadership requires that you have to go completely against the grain of whatever is established. So people having, for example, a custom of burying their daughters, to go completely against this grain, it may be a shocker for some people. To go completely against what was considered to be the norm. So leaders sometimes have to change the norm. What does it mean when we say something is normal? Sometimes the word is used in such a context that it really depends on the person who's using it, how they're defining it, if we want to really define the value. If you go to another planet, they might say air is not normal. Some things may be normal in one place and not normal in the other place. But as a leader, your path as a mu'min who is a leader or who's an extension of that leadership of the imam in some capacity, then he has to be able to be on the straight path. He has to have a straight line, a standard. That sirat al-mustaqim. Now, what if that means sometimes that it's going against the grain of what's normal in society? He still has to be on that same straight path. Now, bear with me. There's a couple of things I want to introduce before we come back to the point I want to make as it relates to this role of leadership of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam. Salawat. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he referred to as Imam Ali. He said Imam Ali is Sirat al-Mustaqim. Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim. He says Imam Ali is Sirat al-Mustaqim. He's the manifestation of what it means to be on the right path. Being on the right path, whether there's people who like you, whether there's people who are congratulating you, you're the successor of the Prophet, or there's people who are trying to kill you while you're leading the prayer. That you're on the same path no matter what. You are that path for people if they want to exemplify something. The Imams are representatives of Islam. They're representatives of Quran. They're representatives of Allah. They're representatives of justice. Because the Imam is not limited to being the leader of Muslims. He's the leader for humanity. Right? Imam Mahdi, Ajalallah Ta'ala Farajuhu Sharif comes. He's not the leadership solely for Muslims. He's the leader for every single human being on the planet. He's the guide for every single existence on the planet. Hujjatullah for every single thing that is alive on the planet. So it's not limited to just for the Muslims. If we were to look at the Imam as being that representative of Islam, those of us who are following the Imam or who claim to be followers of the Imam, we have that hadith that mentions that there are people who claim to be followers. When the Imam comes, they're going to fight against the Imam. It's kind of hard to picture, hard to even fathom that someone who says, I'm with the Imam, I'm behind the Imam, or they say it or they believe it, that one day they could actually fight against the Imam. But inshallah, that never happens to any of us. But there were people in history that we see many examples who claim to be followers or Muslims that ended up fighting against the Imam of their time, or even being the ones who were involved in killing the Imam of their time. So it's not something that's far-fetched. It is possible. But if we look at the Imam as being the representative, if we are followers of the Imam, we are an extension of representation of Islam. This is even more when you're talking about in America. It's even more. Because now when someone sees you as a Muslim, they're not seeing you as an individual, they're seeing you as a representative of Islam, as an ambassador of Islam. So it's not, if people come to know this is a Muslim, then it's not this person, Muhammad, Ali, Fatima did something. It's Muslims do this, or Muslims do that, or Muslims are like this or like that. It's powerful in both ways. So that role of leadership and being a representative is very powerful, but it can go either way. If a person is doing something good in society, it can go very good. It can go long ways. Wow, Muslims are very, nice people. Or it can go the other way. We always see the other way whenever you turn on the TV. So there is a burden that every mu'min bears in being a follower and an extension of that representation. If we want to make a corporate analogy, if we say Islam is a product and marketing is the tool to communicate this product with the people who we want to sell it to, then every Muslim becomes a sales rep or a representative of this company. Maybe the only difference is that when someone in the corporate world, if they're, they have a 9-to-5 job, but your job is 24/7. And it doesn't stop. You're a representative, you never clock out. You're constantly being an example and representative of Islam at every point. Now that's, of course, if we actually believe in the product that we are selling, so to speak. In the corporate world, they always have so much training. So much time and money is invested in training. We have to train, for example, our employees to understand this product, to believe in this product, so that they can go and better sell it to other people. Sometimes, this is an important part of the process, but sometimes for Muslims, what happens is we miss some of our training. And maybe we're not as confident in our product. So we can't sell the product to other people. In fact, sometimes other people may be selling their product to us. And we live in a world where the norm is being defined not by us, obviously. The number one thing, in my opinion, in my estimation, that America exports, the number one thing that they export is what? What is it? Those are all good answers. But there's something specific that I'm thinking of. I just wonder if anybody knows. That is also correct. You're getting very close. Yes, that's what I'm getting to. Dreams. We sell dreams. Sell dreams to people. People living all the way in another part of the world that have no idea about the realities of this world. What's going on here? We sell them dreams. You know, part of a huge part of income for this country is part of it's tourism, but part of it is not the people who are allowed to come and visit, because there's still a lot of people who don't allow to visit, but part of it is what we send out, what is exported. Now this is important part of my topic, because when you can export on this level, and I'm not talking about just products, I'm talking about, as was mentioned, culture, values, custom, tradition, dress, everything. When you can export culture in this volume, then what you have essentially done is you're creating a norm. You're creating a public narrative or a dominant narrative. Now that you have created a new narrative, if someone is doing something other than that, it seems like that's not normal. This is very powerful. Because now I don't have to convince you of something. You've already accepted that. Or the majority of people have already embraced something, a culture, an idea, a concept, as accepted as this as being normal. And so here the mu'min comes, and he wants to be an extension of that leadership and do his role in sharing or making the world a better place. But in order to do any of that, he has to almost go completely against the grain in some cases. He has to go completely against the grain. Who does this dominant narrative or this public narrative, who does it affect? It affects women, it affects children, it affects adults, it affects everyone, really. It affects people who have an idea of what is going on and people who have no idea of what is going on. So, and it affects them in different ways, and I'll explain to you what I mean by that. For us who are here and living in this country as Muslims and as followers of the Ahlul Bayt, sometimes it's easy to get drawn into the trap of what is considered to be acceptable by society standards. You know, sometimes it's more difficult to stand up or to stand against what everyone else is doing. You know, people like to fit in. They like to, psychologically, people like to belong, they say. They like to feel that they're a part of, you know, whether it's a family or an establishment or a greater part of society, a city, different things like that. People like to feel a sense of belonging. They want to fit in. They don't want to have to be the oddball that's different, that everyone looks at. But if something is considered acceptable by everyone, and then one person does something different, then that will be considered unacceptable in a lot of cases. Now the dilemma, when you are the person who's trying to stay on the straight path, in some cases you have to be that oddball. You have to do something different. I don't know if we understand the magnitude of this burden, especially as it portrays to the younger generation. Because you're asking for people who they themselves are going through the process of learning about their own identity and their own independence to now have to shoulder the responsibility of being, a leader and maybe changing, a revolutionary. It's a lot to consider. Sometimes some of the things that, I was trying to think of some examples. What are things that, in different ways that are normal here, that sometimes people, they face them, and maybe subconsciously or subconsciously, whatever the case may be, they want to fit in and to that norm or to whatever that narrative is. So one of the things that you see a lot of times, I know a lot of Muslim mechanics. I don't know how many of them are named Mo. And they're actually Muhammad, right? But it's coming from the idea that, well, in this norm, Mo is normal, and Mo is more acceptable. Mo is going to get, it's make my customers not be scared of me. So I'll stick with this. I want to fit in, Ali is Al, and the many, many, many other things, or the people who completely change their names to something completely different in order because I want to fit in. Or sometimes you see people, they name their children. Oh, I want them to have an American name. I want them to have a name that doesn't make them stand out. So that idea of what we're talking about of a straight path and a sense of straight path meaning our Islamic values, sometimes it's easy to get away from that simply because a person wants to fit into whatever is considered the norm. And again, norm as being a defined value of whoever is telling the story. Like history, they say. It's his story. The person who's telling the story, they tell it however they want to tell it. So in this case, if you're living in this society where for example, biblical names are more normal, for example, then in that case, then yeah, Muhammad's probably going to stand out. So that's one example. Another example sometimes is, for example, dress, where we see people, and it's not limited to what happened with sisters and hijab, but that's one example that we definitely see that happens in society where we have a lot of people who, as Muslims, they feel that, I can't or I shouldn't cover, or they struggle, with their hijab or with covering, because it's more easier for me to be accepted in this way. And when people at my job or at my work or at my business, this is what's normal, and it's easier to be accepted in this way. Customs. As a Muslim, we have certain traditions and customs, some based on our religion, and these religious customs and rituals, there are things a lot of times which are better to do. Sometimes there are things that we have to do. We have to abide by them. As an example, for Muslims, someone who's not mahram to them, right? They don't shake their hand, right? Without wearing some kind of barrier, a glove or something like that. They wouldn't shake hands with someone who's not mahram to them. But maybe this is one of the most common ways of people greeting each other here. So this is a norm. And so you have someone who's an extension or a mu'min who wants to go against this norm. It becomes a challenge. And in many, many cases, it's very easy to say, well, in this case, I'll fit in, it's okay, or it's easier this way. I don't want to have to go against the grain. I don't want to have to explain to people why I'm not, shaking their hands. I always love to tell the story of somebody that I know that he wanted to, it was a challenge to avoid shaking hands with someone who was not mahram because of the nature of this business. So he's looking for another job. He goes to a job interview. He knew that the interviewer was going to be a woman. So he said, I'm prepared this time. So he goes to the interview, and he's wearing cast on both of his hands. I'm not taking any chances. Just in case she tries to sit, or there's barriers, so it's okay. So he said, the interview went great. I nailed it. I'm definitely going to get hired. I'm sure of it. But, we were looking for someone. You're great. Your interview was great. We're just looking for someone who could do a little bit more typing and a little bit more. Oh, no, I'm okay now. Looking for someone whose hands are in a little bit better shape than yours. Went out of his way to avoid, even the idea of, oh my goodness, I have to explain what it is that I believe. Or, as I was saying, that process of the training where the seller believes in the product, right? So the company spends all this money, it sends all its, for example, employees to Florida or somewhere. You guys go through all this training because you have to believe in this product before you can go sell it to other people. And that's valuable to us because we need you to sell it. So we need the customer to believe that you believe in it. So if the Muslim, he skips out on some of the very important parts of his spiritual training and development, then in these cases, sometimes it really is difficult sometimes. And so he may face these kind of situations where standing out is difficult or standing up is difficult. Now, I want to make my one point very clear. I'm talking about standing out or standing up, not just for the sake of standing up, okay? We're going to just be rebels for the sake of being rebels, right? We're going to stand out. Everybody wear an orange jumpsuit or a lime green jumpsuit. We're going to be different from everyone else. No, we're talking about standing up when it's necessary because the values are going against Islamic values. Imam Sadiq explains to us the whole purpose of the method of the Prophet. He says the Prophet didn't come to eradicate the culture of the people of the time, but there were certain parts of the culture that were going against what Allah wanted. So he came to reform those parts of their culture which were going against Islam. So if there were things that people were doing that Islam had nothing against, then that's fine. Right? If there's a method, a way that people do certain things that's not against Islam, then mashallah, that's fine. I mean, that's the reason why Islam is compatible with all places and all times and all eras. It doesn't matter what place or what culture or what country or what language, Islam is compatible with that. Islam has a set of values that it wants to instill in humanity. Then it gives us a whole spectrum of area where it says, anything in here, that's fine. Okay, if in your society Saturday is a day off, Islam doesn't say that's a problem. Okay, if your society it's a Friday, if this day is Sunday, that's fine. Islam just gives us, some other guidelines, for example. Men should dress like this. Women should dress like this. The people who are Muslim in society should dress like this, at least. If they are not Muslim, then it gives us different guidelines of how to even look at them. So Islam has a set area of guidelines for this should be considered our norm. The training process for a mu'min is to make that to be our norm. That's what we consider our normal standard and what's acceptable. So that way, when we see something in society that isn't along these lines, and that's something that we say, hey, that might be something that's a problem. Sometimes these are not such superficial things, like clothes and things like that. Sometimes there are more things about behavior, You take, for example, just in American culture, nowadays, in most places, I'd say in most cities, the interaction that people have with their neighbors is not very like a strong interaction. It may be very normal if someone lives next door to someone and never speaks to them. It could be considered normal. If someone lives in an apartment and doesn't know the majority of the people there, nobody would think twice about it. Nobody would care, probably. So this may be something that, for example, well, maybe not to the extreme of a wajib or an obligation, but maybe as an etiquette for Muslims, the rights of neighbors are really important. And the respect of neighbors is really important. And how we treat our neighbors is really important. It says, for example, if you have a house and you want to, put something, put a little something there that's going to give you more shade, or you want to build a little structure. It says if it affects your neighbor in any way, you need your neighbor's permission from an Islamic standpoint. So that's as an obligation. But then just the etiquette that Islam teaches us about neighbors and how the Prophet, for example, dealt with the lady who used to throw the trash, right? So there is some adab and some etiquette that if I'm following that Islamic path, that may be something that I want to introduce, but that may also be even going against the grain of what's normal in society. It's normal in our society not to talk to your neighbor, not to bother anyone. Everyone has, 20 square feet of personal space that you don't bother them, you don't enter that. People are very, isolated in that respect. Or the idea of stopping to pray. Right? In our religion, this is part of a concept that at certain times of the day, we stop everything we're doing and Allahu Akbar. God is greater than what? Than whatever it was. You fill in the blank with whatever you want. Whatever it was I was doing. Whatever it was I needed to do. God is greater than that. So we have this concept. But that may not be and is definitely not the norm in this society. That's not the norm at any job. Suddenly, so God is more important than what's going on right now. We have a deadline to meet. It's very interesting how universal the Quran is, how universal the word of Allah is, the message of Allah, that He is speaking and it is completely timeless. It's not just for that generation or the time of people living in Hijaz. It's for all times and all generations. When we contemplate about it, the message in every single thing that's in the Quran, as an example. It says, إِذَا نُودِيَ لِلصَّلَاةِ مِنْ يَوْمِ الْجُمْعَةِ فَاسْعَوْا إِلَىٰ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَذَرُوا الْبَيْعَ. When you hear the call for Friday prayer, فَاسْعَوْا إِلَىٰ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ, rush to the remembrance of Allah and leave behind all the business and all the things that you're doing. It says, ذَلِكُمْ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. This is better for you if you had any idea, if you only knew, this is something that's better for you. Let's put this in the context of the norms of our society and where we live today. Keeping in mind that the message of the Quran is universal and the message of the Quran is for all places and all times. Now, when you think about how this is talking about the importance of Salah and the importance of especially Friday prayer, think about the Muslim countries that you know. Most of them, Friday is a holiday, isn't it? Or Friday prayers, for sure, everything is already closed. People are already stopping what they're doing and they're going to pray. Remember, in Qom, you couldn't catch a taxi anywhere. Oh no, it's almost Friday. It's Friday around noontime. Get to where you're going because you're going to be stuck. All this many roads are going to be blocked off because everyone's going to Friday prayer. So Allah is speaking to maybe another group of people who are busy on Friday. Another time of people who are very busy. because Friday close of business is serious time. You have to get things done. Friday is the busiest day of the week here, in a lot of cases. So when Allah is saying, إِذَا نُودِيَ لِلصَّلَاةِ مِنْ يَوْمِ الْجُمْعَةِ فَاسْعَوْا إِلَىٰ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَالذَّرُوا الْبَيْعَ, maybe He is speaking to you and I who are most busy on Friday, for example, with this or that activity or this and that we have to do, or our jobs and so on and so forth. It's a timeless message, not just for those people, but it's speaking directly to us who are most busy on Friday. It says that every prayer has a certain benefit, and it's interesting that the prayer of Dhuhr, the noon or the midday prayer, one of the effects the Prophet said of the midday prayer is rizq. So it's ironic, the person, for example, who avoids the midday prayer for whatever reason, especially if it has to do with him trying to get his rizq. Because Allah is saying, there's something better for you. In kuntum ta'lamun, if you only knew that your rizq was over there. For example, at Friday prayer, that's where your rizq was. But you're chasing it somewhere else because you think your provider is someone. But there are many norms in society. Being a leader means to go against some of these sometimes. And I want to give a few examples also the other way of some of these situations and where people, they were able to take these things that were considered norm and to counter them in a positive way, to show that Islamic way. Please recite Allah salawat. For the love of the Ahlul Bayt, please recite one louder salawat. So, for example, the example of neighbors. When Imam Khomeini was in exile in Paris, what happens is that, at some point there's a lot of media and news and things like that that came to the place that he was staying. And they went to interview, they went to ask questions and things like that. And there's a blog or an article by a man who was a boy at that time in Paris, a French neighbor of that neighborhood, and he writes about what happened. And he talks about how there was so much noise, so much commotion, so much things going on, and how the next day that they all received flowers. And it was a way that Imam Khomeini rahmatullah alayhi, he was trying to show and observe that etiquette of being a good neighbor. And he writes an article, 30 years later, he was so impressed by the character of a Muslim who said that, I'm sorry that I may have disturbed you at night. So he changed completely that grain of how people were looking at Muslims for this man and for his family. A brother once, about shaking hands, he had a neighbor, and the neighbor came, and she was a lady, and she said to him, they just met or something, he just saw him for the first time, or said, hey, very nice to meet you, I live over here, and she extended her hand to shake hands. He said, oh, forgive me, I don't shake hands, but it's very nice to meet you. And she said, oh, you don't shake hands, you mean like Donald Trump or something like that? And he said, no, not like that, I just, like germophobia or something? No, I just don't shake hands, with women, and for this reason, that it's a way that we show respect to, women, is that we only touch our wives and no other women. And she said, really? He said, I need to find me a Muslim man, Where can you find this kind of person? Like, it's chivalrous. It was chivalrous that it was an act of respect, but it was presented in this way to her so that it was very easy for her to grasp and understand. And so that thing which was difficult for the norm, now that became something that she'll, be able to respect more in her circles. There's a sister, and there's a lot of examples, and I want to be short because of time. There's a sister who, she came from Bangladesh, I believe. You might have seen some of her videos or something. I'm not sure exactly if it was Sri Lanka or maybe Bangladesh, but she came from the eastern side of the world. Her family came here. She was a student. She had a really difficult time as a child being a student. She talked about instances where, she was almost beat up, spat on, and mistreated, and because she was wearing hijab. And she didn't want to ever take off her hijabs, though, still. She was proud of her religion, her culture. And eventually she graduates, and she graduates one, the best students in her school. She moves on, start business and things like that. And she started International Hijab Day, February 1st or 2nd, I think, where women all over the world would participate. Hundreds and thousands or millions of people are participating every year for the past few years and wearing hijab to show solidarity with sometimes the difficulties that women face when wearing hijab. So instead of just conforming to what was going on, she made a change that rippled effect and changed the way so many people are looking and the way so many people are doing things. And in a nutshell, our role as being extension of the Imam, as being extension of Islam, as being representatives of Islam, is to make sure that we are prepared to take on that responsibility by being prepared to sometimes have to go against what people call the norm in society, or to be willing to be one of the pieces which rewrites what's normal in society. And also not to assume. Don't assume always that certain things which are considered normal in society, that everyone accepts or embraces them. There's lots of stuff that happens in society where people who are not Muslim even they don't like that, or they don't assume that everyone sees Muslims, for example, in a negative light. Give people some benefit of the doubt. I remember once I went with a brother, and he was so conscious about how he was dressed because we were going somewhere to have a meeting. And he was saying, like, I'm going to just, you're going to go like that, Sheikh? I was just dressed. It was after, like, Friday prayer, so I'm just dressed as I am right now. Sometimes I wear regular street clothes, but I was dressed like this. And so I said, yeah, it's no problem. I'll go like this. And he said, you sure you want to go like that, Sheikh? I'm dressed like, I'm wearing a suit. I'm wearing my traditional dress. And I won't say the country it was from. I said that, this isn't the traditional dress of that country. Maybe after colonialism you thought it was, but that's not actually your traditional dress either. But anyway, beside the point, we go to the place, and we get there, and there was a whole lot of, women in the place, and they were having lunch or talking, maybe 6 or 7 of them. And when we got there, we were asking, is so-and-so here? We have a meeting with him. And they said, no, he's out right now. He'll be back in a few minutes. Do you want to wait right here? And then so I hear them talking amongst themselves and everything. Should we bring a chair? Is this a prince? Who is this person? They're talking to me. They think I'm some prince from some country that came here. And they're telling to the other guy, I'm like, I'm from the Philadelphia. I'm from West Philadelphia. I'm not from some other place. They say, you speak English? Really? So it was ironic, but their perception of how I was dressed was that I was wearing respectful clothes and I was someone important. That was their perception. And they were talking to the other person to try to, can you ask him if I need anything? And I said, it's okay, I don't need anything. Oh, you speak English. So inshallah, we have to take these lessons of leadership from our imams and instill them into our everyday lives. And thank you for listening, even though I went over a little bit, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum.